Welcome back. Today we are going to discuss the topic of prophecy. We may have another class as well dedicated only to prophecy. Well, this one is the pathway to prophecy and prophecy itself. And we'll also have another class, possibly a third one, on the difference between the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu and that of all the rest of the prophets. But today, let's just discuss the pathway to prophecy. All right, so in Sefer Shemot, which we are now starting, it says, Hine anochi sholeach malach lefanecha. Says, behold, I am now sending before you a malach. And what is this malach going to do? Lishmurcha b'darech. It's going to guide you on your path. Ulhaviacha el hamakom asher hachinoti. And he's going to bring you to the place which I have prepared for you, meaning the land of Israel, Eretz Yisrael. All right, so first of all, what's the first thing we could understand about this malach? He's sending us a malach. What is this malach that God is sending to guide us and to protect us on our journey from Egypt through the desert into Eretz Yisrael? And he says, Hishaber mipanav ushma bekolo. He says, listen to what he says and don't transgress what he tells you, his instruction. Al tamer bo. He says, don't go against his word. Ki lo yisa lefishachem ki shemi bekirbo. Right? Because he's not going to stand for your insubordinance. Right? If he's going to punish you. Why? Why do you have to listen to him? Why can't you transgress what he says? He says, Kishemi bekirbo, because he carries my name within him. It says, Ki'im shamoa tishma bekolo, right? And if you listen to what he says, ve'asita kol asher adaber, right? And you do everything that I speak, I, God, speak through this malach, who has my name in him, right? Right? I shall turn your enemies into my own enemies. Visarti et sorerecha. Right? And I shall persecute those who persecute you. Right? As my malach goes before you, veheviacha in ha'emori. And he brings you to the Emori, the Hitti, the Perizi, the Kinaani, the Hivi, the Hibusi, right? The 7 nations inhabiting the land of Israel. Vehikhativ, and I shall destroy them. So, what is this malach? What angel has come to guard us and to guide us on our way? And gives us different commandments that we must follow, and he gives us instruction that we must obey, and God forbid we should transgress his instructions. All right, so a malach. Are any of you familiar with a malach that comes and tells us what to do? Any ideas?
Michael.
Okay, you named him Michael. Anybody else? Any other ideas?
What was the question again?
He says, are you familiar with a malach that comes and speaks to us and tells us, gives us instruction? What should we do?
Is it Gabriel?
Okay, so Sarah says Michael, you say Gabriel. Who else?
Raphael.
Raphael, okay. Let's see. In the guide for the perplexed, the Rambam, this is actually like towards the end of the second section. The second half of the second section, he deals with the concept of prophecy. He says, זה הכתוב אשר בא בתורה, והוא אומרו, הנה אנוכי שולח מלאך לפניך. He says, this passage in Shemot, where he says, behold, I am sending a malach before you, עניינו הוא מה שהתבאר במשנה תורה. He says, this was later, right? This was in the book of Shemot. It says, this was later repeated and expounded upon in the Mishneh Torah. Mishneh Torah being the book of Deuteronomy, right? The last, Devarim, Sefer Devarim. Shehashem amar leMoshe b'ma'amad har Sinai, right? Where Hashem says to Moshe in Sinai, which took place in Sefer Shemot, but it was repeated, the story was repeated in Moshe's speech in the book of Devarim. He says, Navi akim lahem mikerev achehem. I shall bring forth a prophet from among their brethren. V'haraya al ze omro bezeh malach. He says, and the proof of this is that regarding this malach in Sefer Shemot, it says, Hishamen mipanav ushma bekolo. It says, listen to what he says, right, and don't transgress him. En safek shezot hatzava umnam hina hamon bnei adam. Right? There's no doubt that this commandment to listen to the malach, to follow his instruction, was a commandment given to the masses, to the people in general. Vahamon bnei ha'adam lo yireh lahem hamalach velo yisavem velo yazhirem. Right? However, the masses of people, the general public, the angels, the malach doesn't come and reveal himself to them, and to the point where he commands them to do this, and he says, make sure you don't do this, right? Right, to the point where they would have an instruction to not transgress the instruction of the malach. So who is this malach? You see, it's not as we may have thought at first. Raphael, Michael, Gabriel. The malach is the prophet. The prophet is the malach. So there's another meaning of the word malach. And really, the truth is that in the Moreh, in the book, the guide, if I'm not mistaken, he brings 11 different meanings to the word malach. I'll give you an example of another meaning of the word malach. It says, Oseh malachav ruchot misharetav esh lohet. Right? God makes his malachim, right? The winds and his servants burning fire, a burning flame. So the malach is also the forces of nature. And we'll see, or we could see different times in the text of the Tanakh, when it brings the word malach, it's talking about forces of nature. Other times when it brings the word malach, it's talking about a prophet. Other times when it brings the word malach, it's talking about what we may consider an angelic being, whatever that means. So here the Rambam explains this malach in Sefer Shemot is actually talking about a prophet. And specifically, we can say the prophet that took us to Eretz Israel, who is the prophet that gave us mitzvot. Specifically, it's actually talking about Moshe himself. Right, so what is this passage in Sefer Shemot coming to tell us? שיבוא המלאך וידבר עמו ויסבהו ויזהירהו. He says what this passage is coming to say is, because this Malach, his life extends beyond the lifetime of Moshe, because he brings us to Eretz Israel. That's when Moshe passes away. And then he also guards us while we conquer the land. So he says, God is going to send us, or is going to send us prophets, that the Malachim will reveal themselves to these individuals, to these prophets, and they will relay instructions to the masses through these prophets. והזהירנו השם ממרוד במלאך ההוא, אשר יגיע לנו הנביא דברו. And so we also have a mitzvah in the Torah to listen to the instruction of the prophet that speaks in the Malach's name, or not in the Malach's name, but speaks what the Malach told him in God's name. It says, because the name of God is within him. Up until now, understood? So the word malach, the term malach itself is a borrowed term. What does it actually mean? Well, malach actually means, it comes from the word melacha. Melacha, like in Shabbat, we have 39 melacha, 39 things, activities, work activities that we're not allowed to do. That's really what the word malach means, like an execution of a command. So it could be natural forces of nature. It could be the prophet himself, who comes to execute God's word, or relay God's word to the people. So there are many different meanings to that term malach. So how does this work? It says, Nefesh kol basar hi surato shenatan lo ha'in. Right? We already brought this halacha a few times. It says, the nefesh of every living creature is what defines the essence of that creature. Or within the nefesh is the definition of the essence of that creature. We spoke about, let's say, a dog. A dog has very advanced sense of smell, right? He has a very advanced nose. His nefesh is what's able to compute what he perceives through his nose. And that is also part of the definition, or the purpose of dogs. That's why we use dogs in security. We use dogs to sniff out if people are carrying drugs at the airport. There's many other things to it, but in essence, every living creature is essentially defined by his nefesh. והדעת היתרה המסויה בנפשו של אדם, right? And this extra da'at, which at first we understood as intellect, but then we later understood that there's more to it than just man's intellect, right? But this extra da'at that is contained within the nefesh of man, hisurat ha'adam hashalem b'da'ato, right? This is the essence of man, a man who has perfected this da'at, meaning doesn't believe in nonsense. He believes the right things, and he can emulate them, right? He acquired proper characteristics, a proper personality. Right? And on this surah, on this essence, on this da'at, is what the Torah says, we shall create man in our selem, in our likeness. I'd rather not use the word image. Klomar, meaning שתהיה לו surah, that he should have this surah, right? This extra capacity, this extra intellect, נגיד. היודעת ומסגת דעות שאין להם גולים, right? That's able to understand these deot. Deot could be these concepts, these abstract concepts, right? That are not connected to anything material. Remember, like the Malachim themselves, like, that's another term for Malach, is like an abstract concept. Remember, what else could it be? Could be maybe the concept of mercy, the concept of chesed, doing chesed with people, concept of love, being able to understand these things and make it a part of your life. Ad sheidmenahim. Right? Surah Shiyudat Umaseget Hadeot is able to comprehend these things. Ad sheidmenahim. And remember, we saw, what does that mean to resemble a malach? Does anyone remember? What does that mean to resemble a malach? I didn't bring it here. I forgot to bring it into this sheet. He says, if you have a teacher, right? There's a rabbi, a great hacham, very wise. Everybody needs him. Everybody needs to learn from him. However, he is corrupt in his behaviors. He's corrupt in his ways. Well, the halakha says you shouldn't study Torah from him. Don't go learn Torah from him. And it says, Ki siftei kohen yishmeru da'at, v'torah yivakshu mipihu, right? Because the lips of the kohen, right, they speak this da'at, this knowledge of Torah, right? Torah yivakshu mipihu, and so you should ask them to teach you Torah, Ki Malach Hashem Sevaotu, because he is the Malach of God. And the Chachamim said on that pasuk, Im domeh harav lemalach, right? If the teacher, the rabbi, the master resembles a malach, Torah yivakshu mipihu, then you should ask to study Torah from him. And if he doesn't resemble a malach, al yivakshu Torah mipihu. Do not ask, do not try to study Torah from him. So what does that mean, to resemble a malach? It means to behave properly, to fix your midot. So, well, we see even the Kohen here, the teacher, a teacher who was fixed in his midot. Even he is called a malach. Ki malach Hashem sevaotu. And this goes back to our class on the image of God itself. This is what the image of God is acquiring this knowledge / behavior. Okay, so how do we get from that to Nevuah? Well, first of all, the Navi is someone who speaks, so to speak, with this malach, right? Maybe it's somebody who was able to communicate or / contemplate, meditate, understand these abstract ideas and concepts and translate it into his own life, and also maybe translate it verbally, communicate it to us and instruct us how to behave. This is someone who is speaking with the malach. This is Amar Haver. We're going back to Sefer HaKuzari, right? Written by Rabbi Yehuda Halevi. Have anyone here of Sefer HaKuzari? the king of Khosar, who wanted to convert, was looking for a religion. So he's having this discussion with this Hakam in Khosar. And the Hakam says to him, he's trying to explain how, as much as we're persecuted and how we're so disgraced, back then, at least 1,000 years ago, we're so disgraced among the nations, why you should still see value in Judaism and being part of the Jewish nation. He says, let me explain to you the greatness of this nation. The daily le'ed, right? And it's enough testimony Hashem beharam le'amul ummah ben umot ha'olam, right? That God chose them to be His nation from among all the nations of the world. V'hol ha'inyan ha'elahi al hamonam, right? And this senem Elohim, this image of God, was now applied to the masses. Remember, we saw that it didn't used to apply to masses. From Adam all the way to Noah, it was transferred, it was transmitted individuals, right? There was one son, maybe, who was worthy of having this image of God. And that one son maybe had one son too, who is able to transmit this image of God to, right? But here, for the first time, an entire nation has this image of God. They all have this inyan ha'elahi, what Rabbi Yehuda Halevi calls it. The Rambam refers to it as the surah of the nefesh. Until all of them, the entire mass, all the people, reached the level of dibur, communication. Communication meaning with God. That they were all prophesied. And also the women prophesied. Everybody in Har Sinai received prophecy from God. Right? Because we saw up until now, right, only individuals in every generation had this Tzenem Elohim, had this image of God, right, from Adam all the way till Ma'amad Har Sinai. Adam haya shalem bilti tenai, right, because Adam, he was perfect. He was created as a perfect human being. What does that mean? Hu asher kibel hanefesh al tumah, right? And his nefesh, right? We said this nefesh, which defines, right, the essence of every creature, and this nefesh of man that has this da'at yetera, this extra intellect / capability for midot, this ability to understand the abstract concepts and live according to them, right? So Adam had a perfect nefesh. His nefesh was completely healthy. V'hasechem, and his intellect, his mind, al tachlit ma shebayecholet ha'enushi, right? And his mind, his intellect was also perfect. He knew everything. The question is, then I have a question for you, is then what happened when he ate from the tree of knowledge? But that's just something for you to ponder for now, and maybe we'll study about that at the end of the course. דע כאמיתת הנבואה ומהותה, ושפע שופע מאת השם יתעלה באמצעות השכל הפועל, על הכוח הדיברי תחילה, ואחר כך ישפע על הכוח המדמה. So what is נבואה? So Adam Harishon was a Navi. Adam Harishon, he had a perfect nefesh and he had a perfect intellect. It means perfect nefesh means that he had perfect midot. And he also had a perfect intellect. He was very, very intelligent, very wise, right? He was a good person. And that is really what man should be striving to get. And he was a Navi. And we know this, he spoke with God directly. So what is Nivwa? So he says, Nivwa is the Shefa. What is Shefa? Who remembers what Shefa means?
Abundance.
Abundance, great. Abundance. But more so it's an overflow. That's what it literally means. It's an overflow. So when you have an abundance of something, right, and you pass it on to others, that is the Shefa. And we saw the Shefa coming already in the second chapter of Hilchot Yesodei Torah, right? The Shefa of knowledge, right? Life, right? What comes out from God and spills out into this whole system of Malachim, right? And then it comes down to the last level of the Malachim. And when it spills out from there onto the people, that is Nevuah. So it's this Shefa that comes from God through the Sechel HaPoel. For now, we'll just leave the Sechel HaPoel as that lowest level of Malachim. If you remember, the lowest level, the 10th level of Malachim is called the Ishim, and they are those who prophesize the Nevi'im. Right? So it's this Shefa that comes through that level of Malachim. על הכוח הדיברי תחילה, ואחר כך ישפע על הכוח המדמה. Right? It overflows from the Ishim onto the intellect. The intellectual part in man's nefesh. And from there it overflows onwards into the imaginary part of man's nefesh. Right? You say, remember, man's nefesh is built of 5 main parts. There's, how do you call it? Hanek Hazan, which deals with man's metabolism. When you eat, right? How does the body know what to store as energy? What the cells in the body need in order to regenerate? How to regenerate? And what the body doesn't need and can be discarded, that's all part of the nefesh. That's the chenek hazan. There's a chenek margish, which deals with the sensory perception. We have 5 senses, right? We see light, we hear sound. How does our brains make sense of everything that we are sensing around us? That's the second part of the nefesh, right? The third part of the nefesh is our cravings and our disgust, right? What we want. We feel hungry. We want to eat something. We feel disgusted by something. It feels ooey. I don't want to touch that. That's part of the third part of the nefesh. The fourth part is man's imagination. It's the ability to remember things that you saw, even when they're not in front of you. Another part of this imaginary faculty of the nefesh is able to put different things that it saw together, so that a person can imagine, let's say, the Titanic flying in the skies. It's not something that's possible in real life, but it's something that you can imagine. Another part of the nefesh, that part of the nefesh, is to separate things into different parts. So you see a ship and you say, okay, well, there's the sail, there's the deck, right? It has different parts to it. And the fifth part of the nefesh is man's intellect. And we said in that intellect, he has this extra, da'at yetera. So when a prophet receives prophecy, what's happening is that this abundance, this overflow of knowledge slash life slash love slash everything that we've mentioned previously, which is all one thing to God, is overflowing from these malachim, this malach called the ishim, onto man's intellect, and from man's intellect into his imagination. And that's when they receive their vision. It says, Vezot, and this, achieving this, hi hayoter elyona shebemadregot ha'adam. This is the highest level of human perfection. V'tachlit hashlemut, right? And the highest level of perfection, asher efshar sheyimaseh mimeno, which the human race can achieve. The highest level of perfection a human can achieve is developing his imagination on one hand and his intellect on the other to a level where they can now accept this shefa, abundance, overflow coming from God. And he says da, right? In the Shemona Perakim, his introduction to Pirkei Avot, the Rambam, he has an 8-chapter introduction where he speaks about man's nefesh. How does this nefesh work, right? It's basically foundations of human psychology. He says, Da, no nefesh ha'adam nefesh ahad. He says, man has one nefesh. Or, really, this nefesh, which we said has 5 different functions to it, is one nefesh. It's unified. But it has many different functions. Some people refer to the different functions of the nefesh as different nefashot. For instance, you may have heard people saying that man has a nefesh behemit, has an animal nefesh, and he also has like a spiritual nefesh. What are they doing? They're saying that this nefesh, which is really one, but has different functions to it, each one they refer to as a nefesh, but really the nefesh is one. So what does that mean, that the nefesh is one? Well, it means that, well, if you have a sickness in your nefesh, that sickness can affect your entire nefesh, all different functions of the nefesh. And likewise, on contrary, healing your nefesh will also heal the different parts of your nefesh. Right? So if someone has a sick nefesh, he's insane. Right? But it's not really insane. He's let's say he's a cruel person. He behaves badly. This cruelty can affect his entire nefesh, including his metabolism, including his sensory perception, right? Including his knowledge and wisdom acquisition. And so too, healing can heal all of these things as well. It says, and you know, or you should know, shetikun hamidot omnam hu ripui hanefesh vekochotea. It says, how do you cure the nefesh? You cure the nefesh by working on your character, your actions, your behavior. If you behave properly, that brings health to your nefesh. If you behave incorrectly, if you are, what's the word? Mushhat, right? If you have corrupted your behavior, that corrupts your entire nefesh, and that can corrupt all 5 parts of your nefesh. We know today also that many physical sicknesses, illnesses, especially chronic illnesses that people have, they could be stress related, they can be related to some sort of psychological illness that a person has. So a person's psychology, a person's behavior affects also his physical health, and also vice versa. A person's physical health also affects a person's psychological health. אשר ינפה הנפש וירצה לתקן המידות, צריך שידע נפש האדם בכללה ובחלקיה, right? And he who wants to know how to cure a person's nefesh, right? He needs to understand the construct of the nefesh, right? It has 5 different parts to it, has different parts. ומה יחלה אותה, what causes the nefesh to get illness, ומה יבריאה, and what heals the nefesh, right? ומפני זה אומר שחלקי הנפש 5, and therefore I shall tell you that there are 5 parts to the nefesh: the zan, the metabolism, המרגיש, sensory perception, המדמה is the imagination, המתעורר is where you have cravings, also the emotions comes from the מדמה. Also a person's emotions are affected by how a person's the health of the nefesh, which meaning it's affected by what? By a person's behavior, by his midot. It also affects a person's emotions. V'hasichli, and the 5th part is the sichli. And so we say that, well, what is a navi? A navi is somebody who has reached human perfection to the highest level, meaning he has a very healthy nefesh. The 2 main parts functioning during nevuah is the medameh, man's imagination, and man's intellect. And so if you bring your nefesh to this highest level possible of health, well, that's what you need in order to become a Navi. So misodeh hadat lida shehael menabeh et bnei ha'adam. Right? It's a fundamental concept of the Torah that God prophesizes man. Why is it fundamental to the Torah? Well, if there's no prophecy, there is no Torah. If there's no prophecy, then God had nobody to speak to give him a Torah, right, to relay on to us. So it's a very fundamental belief concept that there is prophecy, meaning God speaks to man. Maybe not every man, but he does speak to man. ואין הנבואה חלה אלא על חכם גדול בחוכמה, גיבור במידותיו, ולא יהיה יסרו מתגבר עליו בדבר בעולם, אלא הוא מתגבר בדעתו על יסרו תמיד, והוא בעל דעה רחבה נכונה עד מאוד. Right? These are the criteria to become a Navi. Hacham gadol bechokmah, needs to be very wise. Gibor bemidotav, he needs to have perfected his midot. Velo yeh yitzro mitgaber alav b'davar ba'olam, and his yetzer, and his inclination, does not overcome him on anything. On the opposite. הוא מתגבר בדעתו על יסרו תמיד. He is always able to overcome his yetzer, right, in his mind. Why? Well, the yetzer comes from person's imagination, person's cravings, right? It comes from this part of the nefesh. A person imagines how great it's going to be, this cheeseburger that I'm going to eat. I now have a craving for this cheeseburger, and he eventually acts upon it. Not saying that this is necessarily, makes you a bad person. But this craving that you have comes from this part of the nefesh. and your intellect is what needs to decide if this is a worthy craving to act upon or not. You know, you says, you know, you need another hamburger, azov cheeseburger. You need another hamburger, you already had 3. What do you need another one for? Right? That's why, according to the Rambam, the Yetzer Hara, what we perceive as the evil inclination, is really just man's imagination. And the Yetzer Hatov is man's intellect. Right? I don't know if any of you were here in the class I gave on the book of Iyov, right? Talking about the Satan and the evil inclination, which is all really comes down to man's imagination. It says the Navi is someone who's able to overcome through his intellect or through his rationalizing, deciding what is worthy for him to do now, what he should be eating and how much. I once there's a Beit Midrash down the street from me, and I used to have a havruta there once a week, and every Wednesday night was pizza night, and I'd sit down with my havruta, and they'd bring out the pizza. His name was Moshe. So I say, Moshe, you don't like pizza? He didn't take any pizza. He says, I love pizza. Pizza doesn't love me. And so he didn't have any pizza. He knew it's going to be bad for him. So הוא מתגבר בדעתו על יסודות תמיד, והוא בעל דעה רחבה נכונה עד מאוד. And he also has a very wide understanding. He's acquired a lot of knowledge. Nechona. What does nechona mean? Well, simply used in modern Hebrew at least, it means right, correct. He has correct beliefs. He says, no, but that's not what nechona means. He says, Vatikon malchuto meod. When Shlomo HaMelech became king, and he established his kingdom, it says Vatikon malchuto meod. It means he's able to substantiate his beliefs. Meaning he doesn't just believe that there is a God and that God is one. He understands what that means. He's able to prove it intellectually. Adam shu memune bechol hamidot ha'elu. Right? So a man who has all of these characteristics, right? He is wise, right? He's able to overcome his inclinations through his mind, and he also has very broad and well-founded understanding of the world. Shalem begufo, and he is also healthy, physically fit and healthy. We'll see why that is important later. Sheikanes la pardes, right? When he enters the pardes, meaning when he starts to meditate on the Merkava and on the oneness of God, v'imashech be'otana inyanim ha'gedolim ha'rechokim, right? He starts to think about the angels and the different levels of angels. V'tiyeh lo de'ah nechona lehavin, right? And he has, again, his substantiated real understandings and beliefs in order to understand what's going on in the Merkava. Ulhasig, and to understand, והוא מתקדש והולך ופורש מדרכי כלל העם ההולכים במחשכי הזמן, right? And he's able to separate himself from the masses of the people who are just going around their autopilot, clueless routine, without taking a minute aside to contemplate about God. And he takes the time aside, and he's able to separate himself. He's able to sit down and meditate. והולך ומזרז עצמו, ומלמד נפשו שלא תהיה לו מחשבה כלל באחד מדברים בטלים. And he's able to teach himself, right? It takes a lot of practice to train yourself to not think about anything else while you're meditating, but let's say the oneness of God. So you learn how to do this. You learn how to empty your mind from all distractions. Right? And all distractions that we meet throughout our daily routines. Right? But his mind is always pointing upwards to God, thinking of these malachim that are under God's throne, the kiseh kavod, what they call merkava. Right, merkava means chariot. It's the chariot, the beasts, and the chariot pulling the throne of God. Right, to contemplate about these malachim, and he's able to examine the wisdom of God, kulla, all of it. Misurari Shona, right, from the Hayat HaKodesh, the highest level of the Malachim, at Tabur Haaretz, all the way down to, the center of the earth. In another place where he brings Tabur Haaretz, he said, Ad Yetush Katan Asher Yeh Tabur Haaretz, right, and the wisdom even in a small little insect, such as a mosquito, right, to understand its function in the world, and understand God's wisdom even through examining a mosquito. And you can understand from all of this the greatness of God. Right? This brings us back to that second chapter of Yilchot Yesodei Torah. The mitzvah, which mitzvah is this? Anyone remember? Just mitzvah for the love of God. How do you acquire love and awe/fear of God? Well, my mother said that's a mitzvah to educate yourself on the world. Remember, we brought that video from Walter Lewin, right, about the rainbows, right? So someone who's able to, right, acquire a lot of understanding and knowledge, and from that understand the wisdom of God, right? Then this shefa that coming down from God, which we normally call Ruach HaKodesh in our regular daily lives, says that will rest upon him. Right? And when this spirit, or this essence, this shefa coming from God, this Ruach HaKodesh rests upon this individual, תתערב נפשו במעלת המלאכים הנקראים אישים. Right? Then his nefesh, this nefesh, right, that has, right, his metabolism, his imagination, his cravings, his intellect, this nefesh now becomes mixed in to this level that's called the Ishin, this level of Malach, the lowest level of the Malach, that's called Ishin. V'yehapech me'ish acher, and he will transform into a different person. But what do you mean different person? Into an Ish. He will transform into an Ish. By the way, whenever it says Ish in the Torah, it says V'ha'ish Moshe. It doesn't always say Ish about people. When it says Ish, Vayimtzeu Ish To'eh Basadeh, about Yosef, where he goes along and he came across a person and asked him, have you seen my brothers? Vayimtzeu Ish. The Hachamim learned from that. This Ish was a Malach. They say Gabriel in that case. Maybe it was a prophet. It says the prophet himself, his nefesh becomes mixed in with this level called the Ish, and he becomes an Ish. ויבין בדעתו, and will understand in his mind, שאינו כמות שהיה, that he is not as he was previously. אלא שנתעלה על מעלת שאר בני האדם החכמים. Previously, he was a wise man. He was maybe, a professor, in the guild of the highest professors in the university. But he trained his nefesh, and he sat down to meditate, and he understood this wisdom of God, and now he started to communicate with the Malach. Communicate with the Malach means that his nefesh got mixed in to this level of Malach called an Ish. And he is no longer one of these wise people. He is something beyond that. Remember, we said Maimonides, he wasn't, a lot of people blame Maimonides. They say he was a rationalist. He said, no, he wasn't a rationalist. He's a supra-rationalist. He says there's a limit to man's understanding. That's where Sh'ar b'nei ha'adam ha'chachamim live. Right? Sh'ar b'nei ha'adam ha'chachamim, the rest of the wise people, of the intelligent people, are on this level of where they have perfected their logic and their rationality, and the Navi is someone who breaches that barrier. And he gets communication with the Malach. As it says regarding Shaul, when he received prophecy, right, and you shall prophesy with them, and you shall turn into a different Ish. Not a person, but this level of Malach called Ish. Now that can help us understand this first pasuk. Behold, I am sending a Malach before you. And this Malach, as Maimonides explains in the Moreh, is talking about, I'm going to send prophets to you. And these prophets are the Malach. It's a level that man, or a perfected man, can achieve. That's why the non-corrupted teacher, a rabbi that has proper midot, is called the Malach. It says, Ki siftei kohen yishmeru da'at, v'torah yevakshum mipihu, ki malach Hashem sevaotu. Right? Im domeh harav lemalach, if the rabbi resembles a malach, Torah yevakshum mipihu. What does that mean? Resembles a malach? We said that's what Selem Elohim is to be able to contemplate and understand these abstract concepts, such as life, such as love, such as mercy, such as bitachon. By the way, it's not just those. It's also what's an abstract concept. Law is abstract. Finance is abstract. To be able to understand these abstract concepts is something that man has that the rest of the animals don't, but he's also able to emulate these ideas and live in accordance to them. Ad she'idmeh lahen. So he's able to contemplate about the malachim, and he's able to resemble them in his behavior. But a person who is able to perfect his nefesh to the highest level, to receive the shefa coming from God, He is the Navi. And he is someone who has elevated his nefesh to the level, or the lowest level, of these malachim. He is the concept of mercy. You want to learn what mercy is? Go to this Navi / rabbi / teacher. He'll teach you everything you can learn about how to be merciful. What are the correct boundaries of mercy, right? And where it's warranted and where it's not. And he's also understand perfectly, when to apply mercy, when to be generous and when not to. But all these ideas of how man should behave, he has perfected them by perfecting his nefesh, by understanding it, by copying it into his life. That's the teacher you should be looking for. See, now how do we get there? Let's just read these parts quickly. דעות הרבה יש לכל אחד ואחד מבני אדם, וזו משום המזור חוקה ממנו ביותר. Right? Every man, every person has different דעות. יש אדם שהוא בעל חמאה כועס תמיד. There's someone who's always angry, he's always rage, he gets annoyed very quickly. ויש אדם שדעתו מיושבת עליו ואינו כועס כלל. And there's a person who is very super easygoing, and if he ever gets mad, it gets like just a little bit mad once in a blue moon. יכעס כעס מעט בכמה שנים. ויש שהוא גבל לב ביותר, and there are those who are arrogant, ויש שהוא שפל רוח ביותר. Right? He says, and there are those who are extremely humble. Right? How do we know which de'ot we should be emulating into ourselves, into our personality? He says, He says, well, all of these, they're really on a spectrum, right? You're either angry or you couldn't care less about anything. He says there's angry on one side, there's couldn't care less on the other, and there's a whole spectrum in between. There's a whole scale in between. So he says, Shnei Ksavot, right? Both these ends, these extremes, shebechol de'ah ve'de'ah inan derech tova, right? These extremes aren't good, none of them. Ve'en ra'ui lo la'adam lalechet bahen, and a person should not have any of those midot that are at the end. Ve'lo le'lamdan la'atzman, he shouldn't teach himself these midot. Right, also courage and cowardice, right? Being extremely courageous, meaning that you have no fear at all. So that's nonsense. Don't do that. You'll just end up taking a lot of risk that is unnecessary. ואם מסע טבעו נוטה לאחת מהן ומוכן לאחת מהן, או שכבר למד אחת מהן ונהג בה, יחזיר עצמו למוטב וילך בדרך הטובים. Says, and if you see that you have already acquired one of these midot, or let's say, he says, where's the best place to be? It's like right in the middle, right in between these two extremes. He says, let's say you see that you have a natural tendency towards one midah, towards one extreme over the other. He says, you have to make sure to set yourself back. He says, you already learned to be cheap, right? To be so practice being generous. Practice more and more, and bring yourself back to that middle. And this is the straight path. And this is what we'll start the next class also, reviewing this part. הדרך הישרה היא מידה בינונית שבכל דעה ודעה. Right, so the right path, right, the straight path is the middle midah between those two extremes. והדעה שהיא רחוקה משתי הקצוות ריחוק שווה, it's equally far from each of those extremes, ואינה קרובה לא לזו ולא לזו, right, and it's not close to any one of those extremes. לפיכך ציוו חכמים הראשונים שיהיה האדם שם דעותיו תמיד, ומשאר אותם ומכוון אותם בדרך האמצעית, כדי שיהיה שלם בגופו. And that's why the Chachamim, they command us, they command man to always assess his midot. Assess how generous am I, and how cheap am I, how angry am I in my daily life, and how easygoing am I, right? Do I need to lean more towards the other? Am I leaning more towards one midah than the other? Am I healthy? Do I need to correct my midot? He said that is how you bring health to your nefesh. V'derech zu hi derech hachamim. Says, and this path, this way of behaving, is called derech hachamim, the way of the hachamim. Kol adam shedeotav deot benoniyot memusa'ot nikra hacham. Does anybody who has fixed his midot, right, to be moderate midot, meaning the center of that path, he is called a hacham. Right? That is what we refer to as hacham. All right, so what we said, that was the first criteria of becoming a Navi. Hacham gadol b'chokhmah. Right? Why? Well, Hacham gadol b'chokhmah, I mean, he has tremendous wisdom. And here he says, no, the person who is called Hacham is a person who perfected his midot. Well, still see, he needs to have a very deep understanding. Right? Well, in Ilchot Teshuvah, the Rambam says, we saw this regarding free will. And free will says, well, a man has the ability, he has the option. He can be tzaddik, or he could be rasha. Right? He could be righteous, or he could be wicked. And he says, and he could be hacham, intelligent, or he could be sacham, he could be a moron or ignorant. So, but many people, we see, they have, sometimes I have a good friend, right? Sometimes he has trouble understanding things. He's a very nice, very sweet guy. That doesn't always come together. But I mean, he tries hard. He really tries hard to understand things. But he says, no, what you need to do, right? We said, ripui hanefesh, right? Healing your nefesh heals your entire nefesh. Your midot affect your intellect. If you cure your nefesh by acquiring the right midot, that opens your mind to acquiring right knowledge, to understanding things better. For instance, if you're arrogant, you're going to have a hard time learning from someone because you think you know best. If you have no respect for your teachers, you're going to have a hard time learning things. If you're impatient, you have to teach yourself patience because the difficult things require a lot of patience to understand and to get to the bottom of it. So how do you judge if a person is hacham? It's not if he's got a 3rd degree, a doctorate in something. You see, how does he behave? Is he arrogant? Does he have patience? Does he treat people properly? Because only that person is called a hacham, because only that person will be able to receive that shefa coming from God of the finer, right, more nuanced, more subtle understandings of the world. And I think we'll stop here. We'll review this last paragraph next week as we continue learning about Nibwa. Any questions?
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Okay, I remember during Sukkot, Adonai Melech, Adonai Malach. I don't remember it. So when there were Melech and Malach, one way is interpreted as king, and one way is reigned, and it's raining. So it's the same root of Melachot, is it? Also,
Okay. Now I understand your question. It's not the same, because Malach has an aleph in it. It's true. The mem, lamed, and chaf are the same, but it's not the same root.
it's not same root. I see.
Yeah. So that's
But
why really
Mhm.
the term that we're most familiar with that comes from the same root is melacha, like a work. For instance, sewing, right? One of the melachot of Shabbat that you're not allowed to do is sewing. Building, that's a melacha. All these things are called melachot. That's why when it says, Oseh malachav ruchot misharetav esh lohet, right? His servants are burning fire, and his malachim are the winds. It's because it also says another Oseh devaro. They execute his commands, his wills. Meaning when God does a melacha, he uses these forces in order to do this melacha.
I see.
Right? We said melechet hamayim. On the second day, God fixed the waters. It's called melechet hamayim. Right? The
see.
fixing of the waters. And that is also one of the malachim. Because that is one type of, one understanding of that term malach.
I see. Okay. Thank you. Toda rabba.
Okay, you're welcome. It's a nice question. I never would have thought of that. Anything else? Anyone else?
Yes, is there an answer of who was the angel who accompanied Israel on its road?
All right, so we see this angel was a prophet. Meaning, what does it mean was a prophet? It's talking about prophets in general. Specifically, the one that brought us to Eretz Yisrael was Moshe. And maybe if we're going to definitely study about the prophecy of Moshe, is he actually reached another level above the Ishim.
Wow, thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else? All right, if there's no more questions, then good evening, everyone. And we'll meet back here next week, inshallah.
Thank you so much. Toda rabba.
Thank you
Pleasure.
so
Very
much.
nice.
Thank you.
Toda rabba.
Bye.
Pleasure.
Thank
Good
you
night,
so
everyone.
much.
Good night.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Rabbi.
Good night.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.